My parents told me that Christmas this year would be strictly for my brother Dante and his family. They said my presence would be too disruptive for the intimate atmosphere my sister-in-law wanted. I looked at my mother, smiled calmly, and said no problem. What they did not know was that I had a $2 million estate in Buckhead, fully decorated and ready for the biggest party Atlanta had seen in years. When the photos of the mayor and NBA stars at my dining table hit social media later that night, my parents called me 47 times in 1 hour. But by then, the security gates were already closed. Before I tell you how I destroyed their ego without lifting a finger, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Jasmine, and at 32 years old, I am the person the wealthy call when their lives are falling apart. I am a crisis manager in Atlanta. When a senator gets caught in a hotel room where he should not be, or a point guard gets into a brawl at a nightclub, my phone rings. I trade in secret silence and solutions. My office is the VIP suite of the Mercedes-Benz Stadium or the back rooms of television studios. I command rooms filled with men twice my age and 3 times my net worth. But to my family, I am just Jasmine the assistant. Jasmine the errand girl. Jasmine the one who does not have a husband or a real career like her brother Dante. It was Tuesday afternoon, 3 days before Christmas. I was standing in the tunnel of the stadium, the roar of the crowd vibrating through the concrete floor. I was on a call with a client's legal team negotiating a settlement that would keep a very damaging story out of the press. My voice was steady, my instructions precise. I was in my element, wearing a tailored black suit that cost more than my brother's car, commanding respect from everyone around me. Then my personal phone rang. The ringtone was specific, a sharp, jarring chime I had assigned only to my mother Viola. I held up a hand to silence the lawyer in front of me. "Excuse me," I said, my tone shifting instantly from authority to a practiced, hollow submission. I stepped into a quiet alcove and answered. "Hello, Mama. Jasmine, baby, are you busy?" Viola's voice was dripping with that syrupy sweetness that always preceded a slap in the face. She did not wait for an answer. "Listen, your father and I were talking with Dante and Emily last night. We are just so excited about Christmas. Emily has gone all out this year. She ordered these special linens from Europe, and she is very particular about the aesthetic." I leaned my head against the cold, concrete wall. I knew where this was going. Emily, my sister-in-law, was a white woman from a middle-class suburb who had married my brother 2 years ago. Since then, she had made it her mission to gentrify our family traditions. She treated our heritage like a costume she could put on and take off, and she treated me like hired help. "That sounds nice, Mama," I said, checking my watch. "I have 5 minutes before I have to go back to work." "Well, that is the thing," Viola continued, her voice dropping a register, becoming conspiratorial. "You know how Emily gets. She wants this Christmas to be very intimate, traditional, just the core family unit. She feels that having extra guests might disrupt the flow, and you know you are always on that phone of yours dealing with those rappers and ball players. It is just not the vibe she wants for the children. Extra guests. I was their daughter. I was the one who paid for the knee replacement surgery my mother had last year. I was the one who secretly paid off the credit card debt my father hid from her. But now I was an extra guest." "So you are uninviting me to Christmas?" I stated flatly. "Oh, do not be dramatic, Jasmine." Viola snapped, the sweetness evaporating. "We are just saying maybe you should make other plans. You are a single woman, surely you have friends or work to do. Dante needs this time with his father. He is working on some big investment deals and he needs focus. We do not want you distracting him with your noise." My noise. My brother Dante was 35 years old. He worked in finance, or at least that is what he told them. He drove a leased BMW and wore suits he could not afford. He was the golden child, the prince who could do no wrong. I was the scapegoat, the one who cleaned up the messes. "Okay," I said. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. Okay. Viola sounded surprised. She had expected a fight. She had wanted a fight so she could call me difficult. Yes. If Emily wants an intimate Christmas, she should have it. I will not come. Good, Viola said, relieved but also suspicious. I knew you would understand. It is for the best. Maybe you can come by next week to pick up your plate. I will save some greens for you. No need, Mama. I hope you all have a wonderful time. I hung up before she could say anything else. I stood there in the tunnel, the cheers of 60,000 people echoing above me, feeling completely alone. My hands were shaking not from grief, but from a cold, hard rage. They thought I was nothing. They thought I was just a worker bee droning in the background of their perfect lives. They had no idea who I really was. I straightened my blazer, took a deep breath, and walked back to the legal team. The deal was done, and so was my patience. 2 days later, I was at Le Bilboquet in Buckhead having a power lunch with a client. The restaurant was all white tablecloths, polished brass, and the kind of hushed atmosphere where deals worth millions were whispered over lobster salad. I was sipping sparkling water, listening to a music producer explain his latest PR nightmare when I saw them. Dante and Emily were being seated 3 tables away. They did not see me. They were too busy performing. Emily was wearing a fur coat that looked vintage, or perhaps just old, and she was speaking loudly to the maitre d', complaining about the draft from the door. Dante was adjusting his cuffs, making sure his gold watch caught the light. I recognized the watch. It was a flashy, oversized piece that screamed new money, or rather debt disguised as money. I signaled my client to pause and watched them. This was the middle of a workday. Dante should have been at his office. Emily should have been preparing for her intimate Christmas. But here they were ordering champagne at noon. Look at this menu, Emily said, her voice carrying across the room. It is all in French. Dante, order for me. You know I hate guessing. Dante picked up the menu, squinting. I will have the... He butchered the pronunciation of the duck confit so badly the waiter flinched. And the lady will have the salad. The big one. With the crab. I watched the waiter's face tighten. He was a young black man, professional and patient, but I saw the flicker of annoyance. Emily snapped her fingers at him. And bring the breadbasket, immediately. I am starving. They were unbearable. They were everything I despised, pretension without substance. I finished my meeting, shook hands with my client, and waited until he left. Then I stood up and walked over to their table. Well, this is a surprise, I said, looming over them. Dante jumped, nearly knocking over his champagne glass. Jasmine, what are you doing here? I work, Dante. Unlike some people. I looked at Emily. She had sauce on the corner of her mouth. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my simple black dress. She smirked. Oh, Jasmine. I did not see you there. Are you meeting a boyfriend? Or is this another one of your errands for those rappers? I smiled, a shark-like baring of teeth. Just business, Emily. I see you are enjoying the lunch rush. I thought you would be busy preparing for that intimate Christmas you needed so badly. Emily waved a hand dismissively. Oh, the help is handling the cleaning. I needed a break. Planning these things is exhausting. You would not understand being alone and all. You just have yourself to worry about. I looked at Dante. He refused to meet my eyes. He was staring at his watch, spinning it around his wrist. Nice watch, Dante, I said. New investment, he muttered. You have to look the part to get the part, Jazz. You know how it is. I did know. I knew that watch was likely bought on a credit card that was nearing its limit. I knew because 5 years ago I was the one who fixed his credit score so he could get an apartment. He seemed to have forgotten that. Well, do not let me interrupt your investment strategy, I said. Enjoy the lunch. It looks expensive. We can afford it, Emily snapped. Unlike some people, we do not have to scrape by. Dante is doing very well. I nodded slowly. Good, I am glad to hear that, because life has a way of correcting the balance sheets eventually. I walked away to the front of the restaurant. I pulled out my black card, the heavy titanium one that I rarely used. I handed it to the maitre d'. "The bill for table 4, I said quietly. "The loud couple. "Put it on this. And add a 30% tip for your waiter. He deserves it for dealing with them." The maitre d' looked at me surprised. "You are paying for them?" "Yes. But do not tell them it was me. Tell them it was taken care of by a VIP who prefers to remain anonymous. Let them think their presence is just that powerful." I watched from the reflection in the glass door as the waiter delivered the news. I saw Dante puff out his chest. I saw Emily preen looking around the room, convinced that someone important had recognized their brilliance. They had no idea it was the sister they despised who had just bought their meal. It was a small investment for the satisfaction of knowing their ego was being fed by my charity. I drove away from the restaurant and took a detour through my old neighborhood just to remind myself of what I was leaving behind. Leaving the suffocating atmosphere of my parents' modest brick ranch felt like shedding a skin that had grown far too tight. I navigated my Range Rover onto the highway, the engine purring with a quiet power that my brother Dante could only dream of renting for a weekend. The city of Atlanta sprawled out before me, a grid of golden lights against the velvet darkness. But I was not heading toward the chaos of downtown. I was heading north toward Buckhead, where the driveways were long enough to have their own zip codes and the silence was bought with 7-figure checks. This was my world now. A world I had built in the shadows while my family was busy polishing their fake crowns. I turned onto West Pice's Ferry Road, where the trees were ancient oaks that interlocked over the street like cathedral arches. The houses set back from the road were not just homes, they were statements. French chateaux and Italian villas and modern fortresses of steel and stone stood behind walls of ivy and iron. I pulled up to a set of massive matte black gates that looked less like a residential entrance and more like the perimeter of a secure facility. There was no keypad code to punch in and no buzzer to press. I simply lowered my window and placed my thumb against the biometric scanner mounted on the stone pillar. A soft chime sounded, followed by the heavy, satisfying groan of the gates swinging inward. Access granted. Not because I was someone's daughter or someone's sister, but because I was the owner. The driveway wound through a quarter-mile of meticulously landscaped grounds. Up lights cast dramatic shadows against the Japanese maples and the towering pines, creating a corridor of light and shadow that led upward. And then the house emerged from the darkness. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture, a stark contrast to the cramped colonial brick box I had grown up in. 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling glass cantilevered over a sloping hill that offered an unobstructed view of the entire city skyline. It glowed from within like a lantern, warm and inviting, yet imposing and untouchable. This was the $2 million secret I had kept for 18 months. While Viola and Dante whispered about my instability, I was approving blueprints with architects. While they pitied my single status, I was selecting Italian marble slabs for the kitchen island. Every sharp angle of the roofline and every pane of tempered glass was a testament to the work I had done in the dark. The house did not just look expensive, it looked formidable. It was a fortress of success that my family could not even comprehend, let alone afford. I parked the car on the circular drive, the gravel crunching satisfyingly under the tires. Before I could even reach for the door handle, the massive walnut pivot door opened. Malik stood there, framed by the golden light spilling from the foyer. He held 2 glasses of wine, his silhouette strong and reassuring against the backdrop of our sanctuary. He did not just design this house, he built a home where I was not required to shrink to fit in. I stepped out of the car, the cool December air biting at my cheeks, but I felt nothing but heat. This was it. The stage was set. My family wanted a private Christmas. I looked up at the towering glass facade of my fortress and smiled. I was about to give them a lesson in privacy and power that they would never forget. Stepping across the threshold felt like entering a different dimension, where the air itself was rarefied and expensive. The foyer alone was larger than the entire footprint of the apartment my mother believed I rented in downtown. She thought I lived in a converted studio with drafty windows and secondhand furniture from a thrift store. She liked imagining me there, struggling to pay rent and eating takeout on a sofa with broken springs. It made her feel superior. It made her feel that the natural order of the family was intact, with Dante at the top and me at the bottom, scraping for crumbs. But the reality surrounding me now was a sharp rebuttal to her delusions. My heels clicked rhythmically against the Calicotta gold marble floors, which were heated from beneath to combat the December chill. Above me, a custom chandelier cascaded down from the 20-foot ceiling like a waterfall of suspended diamonds, casting prisms of light that danced across the pristine white walls. This was not a space for a struggling assistant. This was a sanctuary for a woman who commanded 8-figure settlements before breakfast. I walked past the floating staircase toward the gallery hall, which was my personal pride. While Dante bought flashy cars that depreciated the second he drove them off the lot, I bought culture and legacy. An original large-scale painting by a renowned Atlanta artist hung on the main wall, its vibrant colors commanding attention against the stark white plaster. It was a chaotic, beautiful explosion of expression that I had won at an auction last year, outbidding a tech CEO. It was an investment worth more than my father's entire pension fund, but to me it was just part of the scenery. Malik walked ahead of me, his hand resting gently on the small of my back, guiding me toward the rear of the house. He stopped in front of the wine tasting room. It was enclosed in frameless glass, a jewel box of climate-controlled perfection set right into the heart of the living space. The racks were lined with bottles that were older than me, vintages from France and Italy that I had collected over years of travel. There was a dedicated ventilation system just to keep the corks from drying out, and the lighting was designed to never raise the temperature of the liquid inside by even a fraction of a degree. I stood there looking at the rows of dark glass, and I thought about the box wine Emily had insisted on buying for the family dinner tomorrow. She had bragged about getting it on sale at a discount liquor store, claiming it was just as good as the expensive stuff. Here I was standing in a room that held $50,000 worth of vintage Cabernet and rare blends. The disparity was comical. It was tragic. They were so busy looking down on me that they never realized I was looking down at them from a much higher altitude. Malik opened the glass door and the scent of oak and aged grapes drifted out. He selected a bottle we had been saving, a heavy red that cost more than my mother's monthly mortgage payment. He poured a small amount into a crystal glass and handed it to me. I swirled the liquid, watching it coat the sides of the glass, rich and dark. This house, this room, this wine, it was all a secret I had kept locked away. But tomorrow the doors would open. Tomorrow they would see that the daughter they pitied was living a life they could not even afford to visit. I took a sip. It tasted like victory. Malik set his glass down on the quartz counter and turned to me, his expression shifting from pride to a deep protective concern. He reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering against my skin. In a world where everyone wanted a piece of me, where clients demanded miracles and my family demanded servitude, Malik was the only one who simply offered rest. He did not see Jasmine the fixer or Jasmine the scapegoat. He saw the woman who had built a fortress to protect her heart, and he was the only one allowed inside the walls. "You are tense," he observed, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through my chest. "Let it go, Jazz. They are not here. It is just us." I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of his cologne, a custom blend of sandalwood and bergamot that cost more than Dante's entire wardrobe. It is hard to let go when you know they are 5 miles away planning a holiday that specifically excludes you. But you are right. This house is a no-toxicity zone. Malik smiled and pulled up a stool for me at the kitchen island. He opened his tablet, the screen glowing with the logistics for tomorrow night. "Let us focus on the details then. Nothing calms you down like a good plan. We need to finalize the menu for the caterers." I looked at the list. It was decadent, It was excessive. It was perfect. For the appetizers, we had osetra caviar served on blinis with creme fraiche. My sister-in-law, Emily, had posted on Instagram that she was serving deviled eggs with paprika because it was classic. The contrast made me want to laugh out loud. "Keep the Wagyu sliders," I said, pointing to the screen. "And the lobster tails. I want the seafood tower to be so high it blocks out the sun." "Done," Malik said, tapping the screen. And for the main course, the chef suggested the dry-aged ribeye with truffle butter. I nodded, taking another sip of the vintage wine. Yes, truffles. The real ones, not that oil Dante buys at the discount store. I want the house to smell like success. Malik scrolled to the guest list. Now this is the part I love. The RSVPs are at 100%. The mayor's office confirmed this morning. He is bringing his wife and his chief of staff. That point guard you saved from the DUI charge last month, he is bringing half the starting lineup. I looked at the names. These were people my brother worshipped. These were the people my mother prayed for in church, the pillars of the community, the movers and shakers of Atlanta. And they were coming to my house to eat my food and kiss my ring. "It is a power move," Malik said quietly, watching my face. "You know that, right? This isn't just a party, it is a declaration of war." I met his gaze. "It is a correction, Malik. For 30 years, they have told the world I am nothing. Tomorrow night, the most powerful people in this city are going to testify that I am everything." Malik took my hand and kissed the knuckles. "Then, let us give them a show they will never forget." He closed the tablet. "The stage is set, my queen. Now all we have to do is wait for the audience to realize they are watching from the cheap seats." My phone buzzed again. A text from Viola. "Don't forget to drop off our gifts before you go do whatever you do. We will leave the back door unlocked for you." I stared at the screen. The back door. Like a servant. Like a thief. I typed back, "No worries, Mama. I am sending a courier. I am a little tied up with work. Enjoy the privacy." I hit send. Then I turned off my phone. 10 miles south, in a subdivision that was less Buckhead and more adjacent to a good zip code, Dante sat in his home office. The door was locked. The shades were drawn. The only light came from the desk lamp, which illuminated a disaster that would have given our mother a heart attack. Spread out across the faux mahogany surface was a sea of red ink. Past due notices from American Express. Final warnings from the mortgage lender. A letter from the IRS that looked terrifyingly official. Dante ran a hand over his face, wiping away a sheen of cold sweat. He had been moving money from one credit card to pay off the interest on another for 6 months. It was a shell game and his hands were starting to shake. He grabbed the stack of envelopes and shoved them into the bottom drawer of his desk, burying them under a pile of old sports magazines. Out of sight, out of mind. That was the Dante way. A sharp knock on the door made him jump. He smoothed his shirt, forced a smile onto his face, and unlocked the door. Emily breezed in carrying a tablet and wearing a look of pure expectation. She did not look at his face. She looked through him to the lifestyle she demanded. "Dante, we need to talk about my main gift," she said, sitting on the edge of the desk, right above the drawer containing his financial ruin. "I saw this bracelet at Tiffany. It is the one with the interlocking links. It would look perfect with the dress I bought for tomorrow." Dante felt his stomach lurch. That bracelet cost $4,000. He currently had $300 in his checking account and a negative balance on his business line of credit. "Babe," he started, his voice cracking slightly. "We talked about keeping it a little lighter this year. You know, with the market being volatile and my bonus being delayed until January." Emily's face hardened instantly. The sweetness evaporated, leaving behind the cold calculation of a woman who married a portfolio, not a person. "Lighter," she repeated. "Dante, we are hosting your parents. We are setting the standard. If I show up to Christmas dinner wearing costume jewelry while your mother is bragging about the family legacy, I will look ridiculous." "Do you want me to look ridiculous, Dante?" "No, of course not," he stammered. "Good," she said, tapping the screen of her tablet. Because I already put it on hold. You just need to call and give them the card number. And do not use the one ending in 4018. It got declined at the grocery store yesterday. You really need to call the bank about these fraud alerts, Dante. It is embarrassing. It was not a fraud alert. It was a limit breach. Dante knew it. Emily probably knew it too, but she refused to acknowledge a reality that did not include luxury. I will handle it, he lied. I will call them right now. It is just a glitch in the system. See that you do, she said, sliding off the desk. And Dante, do not forget to pick up the wine. The expensive stuff. If Jasmine is not coming, we need to make sure everyone knows we do not need her money to have a good time. We are the successful ones. Make sure it looks like it. She walked out, leaving the door open. Dante stared at the empty doorway. He was drowning, and his wife was asking him to hold a heavier rock. He reached for the phone not to call the jewelry store, but to call the only people left who would believe his lies. He needed to call Mom and Dad. He needed their retirement fund. And he needed it by tomorrow morning. Emily did not leave the room immediately. She paused at the doorframe, her hand resting on the molding, and turned back to look at her husband. She could see the panic rising in him, the way his hands trembled as they hovered over the phone. It was pathetic, really, but it was also useful. A desperate man was a compliant man, and right now compliance was the only currency that mattered. Dante, she said, her voice dropping an octave, losing the shrill, demanding tone she used for jewelry and replacing it with the cold, hard steel of a co-conspirator. You know why your sister cannot be there tomorrow, right? It is not just about the atmosphere. It is not just because she dresses like she is going to a funeral or because she talks too loud. Dante looked up, blinking sweat from his eyes. Because you said she makes you uncomfortable. Because you said she brings bad energy. Emily walked back into the room, closing the door with a definitive click. She moved toward him like a predator circling wounded prey. That is what I told your mother, because that is what she understands. Viola operates on emotion and appearances. But you and I, Dante, we operate on necessity. She stopped in front of the desk and leaned down, her face inches from his. Jasmine asks questions, Dante. She reads the fine print. If she was sitting at that dinner table tomorrow when you ask your parents to sign over the deed to their house as collateral for your new investment fund, what do you think she would do? Dante swallowed hard. She would ask to see the prospectus. She would want to know the risk factors. Exactly, Emily hissed. She would tear your little pitch apart in 5 minutes. She would look at the numbers and she would see that there is no fund. She would see that you are just using their equity to pay off your gambling debts and my credit cards. Jasmine is a fixer, Dante. Her entire job is spotting lies. And you are a terrible liar. She reached out and smoothed his collar, a gesture that looked affectionate but felt like a threat. That is why she had to go. We need Viola and Desmond alone. We need them vulnerable. We need them trusting their golden child without the skeptical sister whispering in their ear. They think you are a genius because Jasmine paid off their mortgage 5 years ago and let you take the credit. They trust you because she bought their silence with her hard work. Dante flinched. Do not bring that up. I handle them. You handle them because she lets you, Emily corrected. But tomorrow we are taking the gloves off. You are going to get them to sign that power of attorney. You are going to tell them it is for estate planning for protecting their assets. And then we are going to liquidate that equity and save our own skins. She straightened up, her eyes flashing. But if Jasmine is there, she will stop it. She will protect them. And if she protects them, we lose everything. The house, the cars, the club membership. Do you want to go back to renting, Dante? Do you want to explain to your friends why your wife left you? Because you could not keep a roof over her head? No, Dante whispered. Then make the call, Emily commanded. Tell them you have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that closes on December 26th. Tell them whatever you have to tell them. Just make sure they bring their checkbook and their reading glasses. And make sure they know that Jasmine is not welcome. We need a silent night, Dante. Because silence is the only place where you can get away with robbery. She turned and walked out, leaving him alone with the humming of the computer and the weight of his own corruption. The plan was perfect. The victim was isolated. The predator was hungry. All Dante had to do was pull the trigger. Dante stared at the phone in his hand, as if it were a loaded weapon. The screen glowed with the contact name, Mama and Papa. He wiped his clammy palm against his trousers and forced a breath into his lungs. He had to channel the version of himself that lived in his mother's imagination. He had to be Dante, the titan of industry, not Dante, the man who was 3 days away from having his luxury SUV repossessed. He pressed the call button and put the phone to his ear, summoning a smile that did not reach his terrified eyes. "Hello, my golden boy." Viola's voice chirped through the speaker, warm and thick with pride. "We were just talking about you. Your father is trying to figure out which tie matches the suit you bought him last year." Dante laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in his empty office. "Tell him the blue one, Mama. It projects authority." "Listen, I do not have much time. I am in between meetings with the partners, but I had to call you first. An opportunity just crossed my desk, and I stopped everything because I thought of you immediately." "Oh, Desmond, come here." Viola called out, her voice moving away from the phone for a second. "Dante has news." Dante squeezed his eyes shut. The lie tasted like bile in his throat, but he swallowed it down. He needed that money. Emily needed that bracelet. And he needed to keep pretending he was the king of Atlanta. "Hey," son Desmond's voice was slower, heavier. "What is going on?" "Dad, listen closely," Dante said, injecting a sense of urgent excitement into his tone. "You know that emerging market fund I manage? The one that requires a $5 million buy-in? Well, one of our investors pulled out at the last second because of a liquidity issue. It opened up a slot. A single slot. And because I am the senior portfolio manager, I have the discretion to fill it with friends and family." He paused for effect, letting the silence do the heavy lifting. "I can get you in, Dad. But we have to move now. The returns are projected at 40% by the second quarter. We are talking about doubling your retirement savings in 6 months." Desmond hesitated. 40%. That sounds risky, son. We have the equity in the house and the pension, but if we liquidate that— Desmond. "Hush," Viola interrupted, her voice sharp. "Are you questioning your son? He is a finance expert. He knows more about money than you ever will. It is not risk, Dad, it is leverage." Dante lied smoothly. "Look, remember 5 years ago, when the house was almost underwater? Who fixed it? Who handled the bank and saved the family home?" "You did," son Desmond admitted, his voice softening with shame. "We know that." Dante felt a twinge of guilt, but he crushed it. Jasmine had paid that mortgage, Jasmine had saved them. But he had taken the credit then, and he was using that stolen valor now to rob them blind. "Exactly," Dante said. "I saved you then, and I am trying to bless you now. But if you do not trust me, I can give the slot to someone else. Maybe I should call Jasmine, though I doubt she has the liquidity for something this sophisticated." "Don't you dare call her," Viola snapped. "She would just ask a million questions and ruin the blessing with her negativity. We trust you, Dante. We want in. How much do you need?" "I need you to sign the power of attorney documents I sent over," Dante said, his heart hammering against his ribs. "And I need you to authorize the transfer of the home equity line. It is just a bridge loan, Mama. I will pay it back into your account before the first interest payment is due. You won't even notice it is gone. We will sign it tonight," Viola promised. "You are a good son, Dante, always looking out for us. We will bring the papers to dinner tomorrow." "Thanks, Mama. You won't regret this." Dante hung up the phone and slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. He had done it. He had secured the funds. He could pay off the gambling debts. He could buy Emily's silence. He was safe for another few months. But as he sat in the dark office, he looked at the picture of his sister on his bookshelf, a photo from when they were kids before the lies and the money tore them apart. He turned the photo face down. He could not afford a conscience. Not when the price of admission to his own life was this high. I sat in the command center of my new life, which happened to be a home office enclosed in soundproof glass overlooking the Buckhead tree line. The desk beneath my fingers was made of reclaimed ebony wood, cool and solid against my skin. This was not just a room for sending emails, it was a war room where I was about to launch a strategic strike against my own irrelevance. I pulled up the proprietary event management software on my screen. I did not use standard invitation platforms for my clients, and I certainly was not going to use them for myself. This system was encrypted and secure. To open the invitation, the recipient had to use a biometric fingerprint scan on their phone. It was the digital equivalent of a velvet rope that only the chosen could cross. I scrolled through the guest list I had curated with Malik. It was a roster of power that would make any social climber in Atlanta weep with envy. First on the list was Mayor Franklin. I had quietly handled a PR nightmare for his administration 6 months ago, involving a leaked memo and a misunderstanding about zoning laws. He owed me a favor, and tonight he was going to pay it. I clicked send. The status bar flashed green instantly. Next was Marcus King, the starting point guard for the Hawks. My brother Dante worshipped the ground this man walked on. He had a signed jersey framed in his office that he had bought on eBay for 3 times its value. Dante did not know that I had been the one to negotiate Marcus out of a very messy situation in Las Vegas last summer. Marcus treated me like a big sister because I was the only one who told him the truth when everyone else was just grabbing for his wallet. I selected his name and hit send. Then there was the heavy hitter, Victoria Banks, the CEO of Sovereign Trust Bank. She was the woman who had rejected Dante's business loan application 3 times because his credit score was a disaster. Dante called her a dragon. I called her a client. She relied on my firm to handle her personal reputation management. She respected competence above all else, and she knew that a party at my house was the only place in the city where she could have a drink without being pitched a terrible investment idea. I worked my way down the list, adding a Grammy-winning producer and a renowned civil rights attorney. These were the people my mother Viola prayed would one day notice her golden child. She spent her Sundays posturing at church, hoping to brush shoulders with their assistants. She had no idea that her scapegoat daughter had them on speed dial. I pressed the final execute button. On screens across the most exclusive zip codes in Atlanta, phones buzzed with a gold notification. The invitation was simple. It contained no address, just a QR code that would only activate the GPS coordinates 1 hour before the event. It promised privacy. It promised luxury. It promised that for one night they could be themselves without the world watching. The RSVPs began to flood in within seconds. Accepted, accepted, accepted. They did not need to check their calendars. In this city, access to Jasmine Wilson was a currency more valuable than Bitcoin. I watched the guest count tick upward, hitting 75 confirmed attendees in under 10 minutes. I leaned back in my leather chair and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 20 years. My family thought they were banishing me to a silent, lonely night. They thought they were punishing me. They had no idea that they had just freed me to host the most important gathering of the year. And the best part was that they were not on the list. This was Black excellence in its purest form, and for the first time in my life, I was not just facilitating it, I was the center of it. I stood in the center of the great room, watching a team of florists install a garland of white orchids that cost more than my student loans. It was a scene of absolute luxury, but to the untrained eye, it looked like chaos. Ladders were everywhere. Drop cloths covered the Italian silk rugs to protect them from falling petals. A man in a hard hat was adjusting the lighting rig for the band. It gave me an idea. A wicked, delicious idea. My family thrived on my struggle. It was the fuel that kept their own delusions running. If they thought I was doing well, they would resent me. But if they thought I was working manual labor on Christmas Eve, they would pity me. And to people like Viola, pity was a drug. I walked over to a corner where a ladder was propped against a bare wall. I took off my blazer and rolled up the sleeves of my silk blouse. I messed up my hair just enough to look frazzled. Then I held up my phone and snapped a selfie. In the background, you could see the ladder, a bucket of paint, and the hard hat. I looked tired. I looked overworked. I looked like the hired help. I typed a caption: "No days off, another holiday on the job site. Grateful for the work even when it is hard. Hashtag grind." I hit post. I knew exactly what I was doing. This was bait. I was feeding the narrative they had constructed about me. To them, I was not the owner of this estate. I was the project manager, the person who held the clipboard while the real owners drank champagne. I was the help. Viola was the first to comment. Of course she was. She probably had alerts set for my name just so she could monitor my failures. Her comment popped up within seconds. "Oh, baby girl. So sorry you have to be working in the dirt while we are cozy by the fire, but honest work is good for the soul. Maybe next year you will get a desk job, praying for you." Then came my cousin Keisha, who was undoubtedly sitting right next to Dante at that very moment. She posted a laughing emoji followed by, "At least you are getting paid, right? Do not spend it all on rent." Then Emily. My sister-in-law could not resist twisting the knife. She commented, "We are just opening the good wine. Wish you were here, but someone has to build the dream right. Keep hustling, Jasmine." I watched the likes roll in. My aunties, my cousins, the people from my old neighborhood. They were all liking it, not because they supported me, but because it confirmed what they wanted to believe. That Jasmine was still struggling. That Jasmine was still beneath them. I did not get angry. I did not delete the comments. I double-tapped my mother's comment and liked it. Then I put my phone down on the marble island and picked up my glass of wine. Let them have their moment. Let them feel superior for one more night. Because tomorrow, when they see the truth, the fall from that high horse is going to break every bone in their ego. The air inside my parents' house was usually thick with the heavy, comforting scents of sage sausage and slow-roasted ham on Christmas Eve, but this year the atmosphere was sterile. It smelled faintly of lemon cleaning solvent and something scorching that was being aggressively ignored. The dining room table was set with the linens Emily had ordered from Europe, which turned out to be a rough beige burlap that scratched the skin and looked like potato sacks. My mother Viola sat at the foot of the table wearing a red dress that was too tight and a smile that was tighter. She looked like a woman being held hostage in her own home, which in a way she was. Emily marched out of the kitchen, holding a platter that looked less like a holiday feast and more like a biological specimen. The turkey was pale, a beige tragedy that had clearly never met a single grain of salt or a clove of garlic in its entire existence. It was so dry that the skin had split and pulled back, revealing meat that looked like gray cardboard. She placed it in the center of the table with a flourish that suggested she had just presented a Michelin star masterpiece. "I decided to go with a minimalist approach this year," Emily announced, smoothing her apron, which was perfectly clean because she had barely touched any actual food. "No heavy gravies or sodium bombs. I wanted us to taste the natural integrity of the bird." Desmond. My father stared at the bird with the look of a man who was watching his last joy on earth evaporate. He reached for the salt shaker, his hand trembling slightly, but Emily intercepted him with a sharp tutting sound. "Desmond, please," she scolded playfully, but with eyes like flint. "You have high blood pressure. We are doing this for your health. Try it first. It is organic, free-range, and grain-fed." My father lowered his hand and looked at Viola, pleading with his eyes for intervention. Viola. The woman who used to slap my hand if I did not season the collard greens enough looked back at him and did absolutely nothing. She was terrified. She was terrified that if she criticized Emily, the golden child, Dante would take offense. She was terrified that the white daughter-in-law she had bragged about to the church ladies would leave. It looks delicious, Emily, Viola lied, her voice cracking on the last syllable. Just beautiful. So elegant. We eat too much grease anyway. This is a blessing. Dante sat on the other side of the table, sweating through his dress shirt. He was not looking at the food. He was looking at his phone, which was vibrating silently on his leg. He picked up the carving knife and began to saw at the turkey. The sound was awful, a dry, rasping noise like sandpaper on wood. The meat did not slice, it crumbled. He put a heap of the sawdust meat onto Viola's plate, then Desmond's. We all bowed our heads for grace. Viola prayed for 10 minutes, thanking God for the family unity and the abundance before them. She prayed loud enough to drown out the silence of the room. When they finally lifted their heads, they had to eat. Desmond took a bite, and I could see the muscles in his jaw working overtime, trying to generate enough saliva to swallow the dry mass. He reached for his water glass and drained it in one gulp. It is wonderful, Viola choked out, forcing the words past the lump of dry meat in her throat. So fresh. Emily beamed, preening under the false praise. I knew you would love it. Jasmine probably would not have appreciated the subtlety. She is used to all that heavy seasoning and soul food. It is an acquired taste, really. The insult hung in the air. They were eating cardboard and calling it cuisine just to maintain the delusion that they were better off without me. They swallowed the dry turkey and the dry lies, washing it all down with the cheap boxed wine Emily had decanted into a crystal pitcher. It was a meal fit for the prison they had built for themselves. Desmond finished his glass of water and looked longingly toward the living room, where the 70-inch flat-screen television hung on the wall, dark and silent like a monolith. For as long as anyone could remember, Christmas Day in the Wilson household meant two things: the smell of soul food and the sound of the NBA Christmas showcase. It was tradition. It was the one time of year Desmond allowed himself to yell at the screen and relax. He pushed his chair back slightly, the wood scraping against the floor. Well, dinner was lovely, Emily, thank you. I think the Hawks game is starting in about 10 minutes. Maybe we can move to the sofa and have dessert there. He started to rise, but Emily's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. Desmond, please sit down. We are not watching television. Not tonight. Desmond froze halfway out of his chair. He looked at Viola, who was busy rearranging her napkin to avoid making eye contact. But Emily, it is the Hawks. We always watch the game. It is tradition. Emily sighed, a long, suffering sound that suggested she was dealing with a petulant child rather than a 60-year-old man in his own home. It is a low-class tradition, Desmond. We are trying to elevate the experience this year. Television ruins conversation. It introduces aggression and noise into a peaceful environment. I have prepared a playlist of Austrian chamber music that is much more conducive to digestion and sophisticated discourse. She picked up a remote control, but it was not for the television. She pointed it at the Bluetooth speaker system Dante had installed a month ago. Suddenly, the room was filled with the screeching of violins. It was not festive. It was not joyful. It was somber, heavy classical music that belonged in a funeral parlor or a museum, not a living room in Atlanta on Christmas. Dante looked up from his phone, irritation flashing across his face. Babe, can we not do the opera stuff? It gives me a headache, and the game is kind of a big deal. Emily turned on him, her eyes narrowing. Do you want to be the kind of family that screams at a screen, Dante? Or do you want to be the kind of family that appreciates culture? This is what wealthy people do. They appreciate the arts, they converse, they do not vegetate. Dante shut his mouth instantly. He knew that look. It was the look that said, if you argue with me, I will bring up the credit card bill I found in your jacket pocket. He picked up his wine glass and drained it, signaling his surrender. Desmond looked at Viola one last time, pleading silently. This was his house. He paid the mortgage. He paid the electric bill. But he was a prisoner in his own living room. Viola cleared her throat, her voice trembling. It is lovely music, Emily, very soothing. Desmond, sit down. We can check the score on our phones later. We should enjoy the atmosphere Emily created. Desmond slowly sank back into his chair. He looked small. The vibrant man who used to host neighborhood barbecues and debate sports stats for hours was gone, replaced by this shell who was afraid to turn on his own television. Emily smiled a tight, victorious expression. "Thank you, Mother Wilson. I knew you would understand. Now, let us discuss the estate planning Dante mentioned. The music provides such a dignified backdrop for serious financial discussions, do not you think?" The violins screeched on, filling the silence where laughter and cheering should have been. They sat there, trapped in a performance of sophistication that felt more like a wake than a celebration. Dante's phone vibrated against his thigh for the fourth time in 10 minutes. It was a persistent, angry buzz that felt less like a notification and more like a taser. He glanced down at the screen beneath the tablecloth. Unknown caller. He knew exactly who it was. It was the loan shark from Vinings who had fronted him $50,000 for a sure-thing sports bet that had turned into a disaster in the fourth quarter. "Excuse me," Dante muttered, pushing his chair back. "I have to take this. It is the London office. Markets never sleep right." He did not wait for a response. He rushed into the hallway, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood. Emily watched him go, her eyes narrowing into slits. She knew it was not London. She knew it was trouble. Dante pressed the phone to his ear, his voice a harsh whisper. "I told you I would have it tomorrow. Do not call me at my parents' house." He listened to the voice on the other end, a calm, terrifying promise of violence if the wire transfer did not hit by noon. Dante hung up his hands, shaking so badly he almost dropped the device. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead with his sleeve and composed his face into a mask of stressed importance. He walked back into the dining room. "Everything okay, son?" Viola asked, her fork hovering over a piece of dry cornbread. "You work too hard." "It is a volatile time," Mama Dante said, resuming his seat. "But that is actually why we need to do this now." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. He did not wait for dessert. He did not wait for the table to be cleared. He pushed the centerpiece of holly and pine cones aside and laid the documents flat on the tablecloth. "This is the paperwork for the fund," Dante said, his voice tight. "The window is closing at midnight. If we do not get the signatures and the authorization now, we lose the spot. And I cannot let you lose out on this kind of return." Desmond put on his reading glasses, his hand trembling slightly. "It seems like a lot of paper, son. Maybe we should look it over in the morning when the light is better." Emily let out a sharp, exasperated breath. "Desmond, honestly. Do you think Dante would bring you something that was not ready? He has been working on this all week just for you. Do you want to insult him by acting like he is trying to trick you?" "It is not that," Desmond said, shrinking under her gaze. "It is just my eyes are tired, and this is the deed to the house, right? It is a big step. It is a necessary step." Dante snapped his patience, snapping under the weight of the debt collector's threat. "Dad, do you want to retire comfortably, or do you want to pinch pennies forever? I am offering you a lifeline here. I am trying to double your net worth, and you are worrying about reading the fine print. Do you trust me or not?" Viola reached out and covered Desmond's hand. Desmond signed the papers. "Dante is the financial expert. He went to college for this. He knows what he is doing." "Don't be stubborn." Dante uncapped a heavy, expensive pen and thrust it toward his father. "Just sign here, and initial the bottom. I will handle the rest. I will handle the transfer, the account setup, everything. You will not have to lift a finger." Desmond looked at Viola, then at Dante. He saw the desperation in his son's eyes, but he mistook it for intensity. He mistook the fear for ambition. He took the pen. The scratching of the nib against the paper sounded loud in the quiet room. It sounded like a key turning in a lock sealing a cell door. "There," Dante said, snatching the papers away the moment the ink was dry. "Done. You just made the best decision of your life." Emily smiled, a predatory expression that did not reach her eyes. "Finally. Now can we please have dessert? All this business talk is exhausting." Dante slid the papers back into his pocket right next to the phone that was vibrating again. He had the house. He had the money. He had sold his parents' future to buy himself another month of pretending. He took a sip of wine, but it did not wash away the taste of ash in his mouth. Viola cleared her throat and tapped her fork against her wineglass, calling for silence in a room that was already suffocatingly quiet. She stood up, smoothing the fabric of her dress with trembling hands. Her eyes were bright with tears, but they were not tears of joy. They were the tears of a woman who was desperately trying to convince herself that her sacrifices were worth it. She reached under the table and pulled out a small rectangular box, wrapped in faded velvet. It was worn around the corners, the deep blue fabric balding in spots from decades of handling. "Emily," she began, her voice wobbling, "since you joined this family, you have brought such a level of sophistication and grace that we never had before. You have elevated us, and because of that, I decided it was time to pass down the most precious thing I own." Desmond looked up sharply. He knew that box. He knew exactly what was inside. It was his mother's pearl necklace, a double strand of Akoya pearls with a diamond clasp. It was the necklace Jasmine had admired since she was a little girl. Jasmine used to sit on Viola's bed and run her fingers over those pearls, listening to stories about her grandmother. Viola had promised them to Jasmine on her 16th birthday, then her 18th, then her 21st. She had always found a reason to hold on to them, but the understanding remained. They were Jasmine's birthright. Viola walked around the table and placed the box in Emily's hands. "But I want you to have them now," Viola said, "because you are the future of this family. You are the one who will carry the Wilson name into the right circles." Emily looked at the box with mild curiosity, not reverence. She popped the lid open with one hand. The pearls glowed softly against the white satin lining, lustrous and heavy with history. They were worth thousands, but more importantly, they carried the soul of the family matriarch. "Oh," Emily said. Her voice was flat. "Pearls. How vintage." She did not take them out of the box. She did not gasp. She did not tear up. She looked at them the way one might look at a garage sale find that was slightly overpriced. "They are real, Akoya," Viola said, eager for approval. "My mother wore them to her wedding. I wore them to mine. I always thought—" She paused, catching herself before she mentioned Jasmine. "I thought they belonged with someone who truly appreciates tradition." "That is so sweet of you, Viola," Emily said, snapping the box shut. It made a hollow sound. "I will have to find the right occasion for them. They are very retro. Maybe for a costume party or something themed." Viola's smile faltered, but she forced it back into place. She leaned down to hug Emily, wrapping her arms around the woman who openly looked down on her. Emily endured the hug, her body stiff, patting Viola's back with a rhythmic, dismissive motion. "Thank you, Mama," Dante said quickly, trying to cover the awkwardness. "It is a beautiful gift. Emily loves it. Right, babe?" "Right," Emily said, flashing a tight smile. "Love it." Viola turned away to go back to her seat, wiping her eyes, satisfied that she had performed her duty as the benevolent matriarch. As soon as her back was turned, Emily's expression shifted instantly. She looked at Dante and rolled her eyes so hard it looked painful. She picked up the velvet box with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. She leaned in close to Dante, her voice a whisper that was meant only for him, but cut through the room like a knife. "Can we appraise this?" she hissed. "I am not wearing dead people jewelry, Dante. It smells like old perfume and desperation. Maybe we can trade it in for something from this century, or sell it. God knows we need the cash." She dropped the box onto the table next to her half-eaten turkey. It landed with a thud, sitting there like a discarded prop. Desmond saw it. He saw the look on her face. He heard the whisper. He looked at his wife, who was beaming at her son, oblivious to the fact that she had just betrayed her daughter to please a woman who would sell her legacy for a store credit. Desmond took a long drink of his wine, but it did nothing to wash away the bitterness of what he had just witnessed. He looked at the empty chair where Jasmine should have been, and for the first time that night, he realized exactly what they had lost. 5 miles away, The scene outside my gates was a stark contrast to the dreary silence of my parents' cul-de-sac. The air here crackled with energy, the kind that only money and influence could generate. A line of cars stretched down the private road, their headlights cutting through the darkness like dual beams of liquid gold. This was not just a traffic jam, it was a parade of automotive excellence. A team of valets dressed in crisp black uniforms with gold piping moved with the precision of a synchronized swim team. They opened doors for guests stepping out of vehicles that cost more than most houses in the state. A matte black Rolls-Royce Phantom idled quietly, its passenger, a well-known music executive, stepping out onto the heated driveway. Behind him was a Bentley Continental GT in midnight blue, gleaming under the strategic uplighting of the landscape. Further back, I spotted the distinctive gull-wing doors of a Tesla Model X and the aggressive grille of a Lamborghini Urus. It was a collection of horsepower and prestige that turned my front yard into the most exclusive car show in Atlanta. The valets treated each vehicle with reverence, parking them in a perfect semicircle that showcased their emblems like trophies. The air smelled of expensive exhaust pine needles and the faint metallic tang of winter frost. I watched from the security monitor in the kitchen, a small smile playing on my lips. My brother Dante drove a leased 3 Series BMW and thought he was a king. If he could see this driveway right now, his head would probably explode from sheer envy. This was the level of wealth he pretended to have, the level he lied to achieve. And it was parking on my gravel. Guests walked up the stone path toward the massive front doors, their laughter floating on the wind. They were wrapped in furs and cashmere diamonds, catching the light from the architectural lanterns lining the walkway. Security personnel, discreet but imposing in their dark suits and earpieces, checked digital invitations at the door. There was no list to check off with a pen. A quick scan of a phone screen, a green light, and they were ushered into the warmth. It was seamless. It was elegant. It was power made visible. I took a sip of water, my hand steady. For years I had been the invisible daughter, the one who fixed problems from the back room, while others took the credit. Tonight I was not fixing anything. I was creating a moment. And as the doors opened to admit the mayor of Atlanta, I knew that the silence my family had requested was about to be shattered by the roar of my success. This was not just a party, it was a statement. And the statement was loud, clear, and undeniably expensive. Stepping inside my home felt like walking into the heart of a diamond. The foyer was no longer just a grand entrance, it was a portal to another world. The amber glow of the custom chandelier was now amplified by strategic mood lighting that bathed the walls in hues of gold and soft violet. The air was alive, vibrating with the low hum of conversation and the clinking of crystal. But it was the sensory details that truly defined the night. In the center of the great room, a tower of champagne glasses rose 5 tiers high, a precarious, beautiful sculpture of fragility and excess. A server in white gloves stood beside it, pouring a magnum of Dom Pérignon into the top glass. The golden liquid cascaded down, filling each flute with perfect precision, a waterfall of bubbles that caught the light like liquid stars. It was a visual that screamed celebration, but whispered money. To the left, a seafood station had been erected on a slab of illuminated ice. It was a bounty that would make Poseidon jealous. Maine lobster tails, plump and sweet, were arranged in concentric circles, their bright red shells a stark contrast to the icy blue beneath. Oysters from Prince Edward Island, shucked fresh on demand, sat in their pearlescent shells waiting for a dash of mignonette. King crab legs, thick as baseball bats, were piled high like driftwood on a luxury beach. But the true showstopper was the carving station. A chef in a pristine white coat stood behind a side of beef that was almost black on the outside and ruby red within. It was authentic Japanese A5 Wagyu, the kind of meat that melted on the tongue like butter. The smell was intoxicating, a rich, savory aroma of rendered fat and truffle salt that made the mouth water instantly. Guests lined up, plates in hand, eyes wide, not just eating, but experiencing. The soundtrack to this opulence was provided by a five-piece jazz ensemble set up on the raised platform near the window wall. They were not playing elevator music. They were playing Coltrane and Davis with a soulful intensity that filled the cavernous room without overwhelming it. The saxophone player closed his eyes as he hit a high note, the brass instrument gleaming under the spotlights. The bass player plucked strings that resonated in the chest, a heartbeat for the party. I watched it all from the top of the floating staircase, my hand resting on the cool glass railing. This was not a gathering of friends. This was a congregation of power. The mayor was laughing with a tech billionaire near the fireplace. A famous actress was sharing a laugh with the bank CEO by the wine room. They were relaxed. They were happy. They were here in my house eating my food, drinking my wine. And for the first time in my life I realized that the table I had built was not just bigger than the one I was excluded from. It was infinitely better. My family was eating dry turkey in silence. I was hosting a feast for kings. The disparity was not just financial, it was spiritual. And as I took the first step down the stairs, I knew that tonight the queen was finally claiming her throne. The music did not stop, but the conversation certainly did. As my heel touched the first marble step of the floating staircase, I felt the shift in the energy of the room. It moved from the chaotic buzz of a party to the focused silence of an audience witnessing a main event. I was wearing a custom crimson velvet gown that had been draped on my body by a designer in Paris just 3 weeks ago. The bodice was structured and architectural, holding me with the firmness of armor, while the skirt flowed around my legs like a river of dark red wine. It was not a dress that asked for attention. It was a dress that demanded submission. I descended slowly, my hand gliding down the glass railing. I did not look down at my feet. I looked straight ahead, scanning the room with the calm detachment of a monarch surveying her court. I saw the shock in the eyes of the bank CEO. I saw the admiration on the face of the NBA star. For years I had walked into rooms with my head down, apologizing for taking up space, hoping no one would notice the stain on my reputation that my family had put there. Tonight, I was taking up all the space. I was the oxygen in the room. Malik was waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs. He looked at me not just with love, but with a profound respect that made my knees weak. He held out his hand and I took it. His grip was warm and solid, a tether to the earth while I floated on the high of my own creation. He leaned in and whispered, "You look like you own the world." I smiled at him. "Tonight I do." We moved into the crowd together. People parted for us like the Red Sea. I did not have to raise my voice or wave my hand. My presence was enough. I stopped in front of Mayor Franklin, who was holding a glass of scotch and laughing with a real estate mogul. When he saw me, he stopped mid-sentence and straightened his tie. "Jasmine," he said, extending his hand. "I have been to gala dinners at the White House that were less impressive than this. You have truly outdone yourself." I shook his hand, my grip firm and equal. "Thank you, Mayor. I believe in setting a standard. If we want Atlanta to be a world-class city, we have to host world-class events." He nodded, appreciative of the ambition. "You are absolutely right. And I have not forgotten what you did for my administration last summer. If you ever decide to run for office, let me know. I would rather have you on my ticket than against me." I laughed, a low, throaty sound that felt genuine. "I prefer to stay behind the scenes, Mayor. The power is in the shadows. But I appreciate the endorsement." I moved on, leaving the most powerful man in the city staring after me with respect. My mother thought I was a failure because I did not have a husband and a minivan. She did not understand that I had traded domestic mediocrity for influence. I was not just a woman at a party. I was the architect of the night. And as I accepted a fresh glass of champagne from a passing server, I knew that this image, the woman in the red dress holding court with kings, was the only truth that mattered. The band leader, a saxophonist with a reputation for improvisation, suddenly switched the tempo. The frenetic energy of the bebop faded, replaced by the smooth, soulful opening notes of Etta James's "At Last." It was a cliché, yes, But in this room under these lights, it felt revolutionary. The conversation died down, not because anyone called for silence, but because the shift in atmosphere was palpable. It was the sound of a moment crystallizing. Malik stepped away from my side. He moved to the center of the room, right beneath the cascading chandelier. He did not look nervous. He looked like a man who had spent his entire life building skyscrapers only to realize that the most important structure he would ever build was a family. He cleared his throat, and the room went silent. Even the mayor put down his glass. Jasmine Malik said, his voice carrying without a microphone, deep and resonant. You have spent your life fixing other people's broken foundations. You shore up walls that are crumbling. You put out fires that threaten to burn everything down. You are the strongest person I know. But even the strongest structures need a cornerstone. I stood frozen near the fireplace, my heart hammering against the velvet of my dress. This was not in the run of show. This was not on the itinerary. He walked toward me, his eyes locked on mine. For 2 years, I have watched you fight battles that no one else sees. I have watched you build this life, this career, this home with nothing but your own grit and grace. You did it alone. But you do not have to do it alone anymore. He reached into his jacket pocket. The movement was slow, deliberate. He pulled out a small black velvet box. A collective gasp went through the room. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. Malik dropped to one knee. The marble floor was hard, but he did not flinch. He opened the box. Inside sat a diamond that seemed to have its own gravitational pull. It was an emerald-cut 5 carats of flawless clarity, set in a simple platinum band that let the stone speak for itself. It was not flashy. It was monumental. It was a ring for a woman who did not need to shout to be heard. Jasmine Wilson, he said, looking up at me with eyes that shone brighter than the diamond. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of being my wife? Will you let me build a life with you that is worthy of the queen you are? Tears pricked my eyes hot and fast. I looked at him. This man who saw me when I was invisible, who loved me when I was broken. I looked at the ring, a symbol of a future I had never dared to dream of. Yes, I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. Yes, Malik, 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. He stood up and pulled me into his arms, lifting me off the ground as he kissed me. The room exploded. Applause thundered against the high ceilings. The mayor was clapping. The NBA star was whistling. The rapper was shouting his approval. It was a roar of validation that drowned out every whispered insult, every snide comment, every moment of doubt I had ever felt. I buried my face in Malik's neck, inhaling his scent, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel like a survivor. I felt like a victor. And I knew with absolute certainty that this moment was going to be the headline of the year. The applause from the proposal had barely faded when the atmosphere shifted from romantic reverence to electric hype. Marcus T, better known to the world as King T, the rapper who had 3 platinum albums and a sneaker deal worth 9 figures, pulled out his gold-encased smartphone. He did not ask for permission because he knew he did not need it. This was part of the deal. This was the signal flare I had been waiting to fire. He tapped the live button on Instagram. Within seconds, the view count on the corner of his screen scrolled past 50,000, then 100,000, then 500,000. He held the phone up high, panning across the room, capturing the vaulted ceilings, the cascading chandelier, and the ocean of black tie elegance. Yo, Atlanta, stand up! He shouted, his voice booming over the jazz music. Y'all thought y'all knew what Christmas looked like, but y'all were wrong. We are not at the club tonight. We are not at the hotel. We are at the sanctuary. He walked through the crowd, the camera lens capturing the mayor raising a glass of scotch, the point guard for the Hawks laughing at a joke, and the bank CEO eating an oyster. It was a reel of power players that no promoter in the city could have assembled for any price. Look at this spread, King T narrated, moving the camera over the seafood tower. We got lobster straight from Maine. We got beef that literally melts in your mouth. We got champagne flowing like water. This is not a party, this is a coronation. He turned the camera around to face himself, then pivoted to frame me and Malik. I was sipping my champagne, the diamond on my finger catching the light like a supernova. I looked straight into the lens. I did not smile like a fan. I smiled like the woman who signed the checks. And this right here, King T said, pointing at me. This is the woman, the legend, the fixer. Y'all know her name even if you pretend you do not. When your favorite player gets in trouble, who do they call? They call Jasmine. When the politician needs the scandal to disappear, who do they call? They call Jasmine. She is the real mayor of this city, and tonight, she just got that ring to match the crown. He zoomed in on the ring, 5 carats of perfection. The comments on the screen were flying by so fast they were a blur of fire emojis and heart eyes. People were asking where this was. They were asking how to get in. They were realizing that while they were posting pictures of matching pajamas and ham dinners, the real power in Atlanta was gathered on a hill in Buckhead. I watched King T work the room. He was my town crier. He was broadcasting my success to the world, and I knew that signal was traveling. It was bouncing off towers and satellites, moving through fiber optic cables, and right into the living rooms of the people who had tried to bury me. King T ended the stream with a salute. Silent night gala, baby. If you are not here, you are nowhere. Peace. He put the phone away and winked at me. I raised my glass in a silent toast. The digital bomb had been dropped. The shock waves were already spreading outward, moving at the speed of light toward a brick ranch house 10 miles away, where a family was eating dry turkey and pretending to be happy. I took a slow, satisfaction-filled breath. The silence was over. The noise was about to begin. The silence in my parents' living room was heavy enough to crush a lung. The Austrian chamber music had finally stopped because the Bluetooth speaker ran out of battery and no one had the energy to find a charger. They sat there digesting the dry turkey and the heavy realization that their intimate Christmas was actually just a boring night in a drafty house. My cousin Keisha sat in the corner on the beige recliner. She was 22, addicted to TikTok, and the only person in the room who knew exactly what time it was. I had sent her a direct message 2 hours ago telling her to watch the feed and turn up the volume. Keisha looked up from her phone, her eyes wide with mock surprise. "Oh my God," she said, her voice slicing through the tension. "Y'all need to see this right now." "What is it?" Keisha Viola asked irritably. "We are having family time. Put the phone away." "No, Auntie Vi, you do not understand," Keisha insisted, standing up. "It is Jasmine. She is trending. Like #1 in the world trending." Dante scoffed. "Trending for what? Did she get fired? Did she trip on a red carpet?" Keisha did not answer. She just pointed her phone at the smart television mounted above the fireplace and hit the cast button. The screen flickered from black to a high-definition explosion of color and light. The sound of jazz and laughter filled the small room, instantly drowning out the hum of the refrigerator. On the screen, King T was holding court. The camera panned across a room that looked like a palace. It swept over the seafood tower, the champagne fountain, the velvet furniture. It lingered on the faces of the guests. "Is that Mayor Franklin?" Desmond asked, squinting at the screen. "Why is the mayor at a party with that rapper?" "Wait," Dante said, standing up slowly. "That is not a club. Look at the walls. Look at the art. That is a house." The camera swung around, and there I was. I was wearing the red velvet dress, holding the crystal flute, my hand resting on Malik's arm. The diamond on my finger flashed like a strobe light. "Yo, we are live from the fortress," King T's voice boomed through the speakers. The Silent Night Gala, hosted by the Queen herself, Jasmine Wilson. If you thought you knew what power looked like, you were looking in the wrong zip code. Emily let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. "That is Jasmine. That is her dress. I saw that dress in Vogue last month. It costs $12,000. Viola stood up, her hand flying to her throat. "Where is she?" "That is not her apartment. That looks like a museum." "She is in Buckhead," Dante whispered, his face draining of color. I know that view. That is the West Paces Ferry estate, the one that sold for 2 million cash last month. The buyer was anonymous. The camera zoomed in on my face. I looked calm, regal, and utterly unbothered. I looked like a woman who had never eaten dry turkey in her life. Jasmine owns that house, Keisha said, her voice filled with a glee she did not bother to hide. Look at the comments. Everyone is saying she is the richest woman in the room. Emily walked toward the television as if she were in a trance. She reached out and touched the screen right over the image of the caviar service. She has Osetra caviar, she murmured. Tins of it. And we are eating deviled eggs. The live stream cut to Malik kissing my cheek and the room erupted in cheers on the screen. Congratulations to the future Mrs. Malik Wright, King T shouted. The architect and the fixer, power couple of the century. He proposed, Viola whispered. She is engaged to Malik Wright, the billionaire architect, and she did not tell me. She did not tell any of us, Desmond said, sinking back into his chair, because we told her not to come. The realization hit them all at once like a physical wave. They were sitting in a cold house with a mountain of debt watching the daughter they despised host the most important night of the year. They were the outsiders, they were the poor relations, and they had done it to themselves. The frozen image on the television screen burned into the retina of everyone in the room like a nuclear flash. Emily stood inches from the display, her breath fogging the glass, right over the image of a waiter serving truffle-topped hors d'oeuvres. Her hands were trembling, not from cold, but from a rage so pure it was almost blinding. She spun around to face Dante, her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. You said she was a secretary, she hissed, her voice rising to a shriek that cracked the stagnant air of the living room. You said she fetched coffee for rich people. You did not tell me she was the rich people. Look at that chandelier, Dante. That is custom baccarat. I saw it in a design magazine last year. It costs more than your car. Dante did not answer. He was staring at the screen, but he was not seeing interior design. He was seeing a lifeboat. He watched the way Jasmine moved through the crowd, the way the light caught the diamonds on her wrist. He did not see a sister he had neglected. He saw a zero balance on his gambling debts. He saw the foreclosure notice on his desk disappearing in a puff of smoke. The panic that had been crushing his chest all evening suddenly evaporated, replaced by a manic entitlement. She has it, he whispered. She has all of it. The liquidity, the assets. She could write a check right now, and I would be free. Viola sat slumped on the sofa, clutching a throw pillow to her chest, as if it were a shield. Her eyes were wide and wet, darting between the screen and her son. Why did she hide it? She wailed, her voice thick with betrayal. I am her mother. I prayed for her every day. Why would she keep this blessing from us? She let us think she was struggling. She let me worry about her soul when she was living like a queen. Because she is selfish. Emily snapped, grabbing her coat from the rack by the door. She wanted to laugh at us. She wanted to sit in her castle and look down on us eating dry turkey. It is sick. It is perverse. She thrust her arms into her sleeves, her movements jerky and aggressive. We are going over there. Right now. Desmond looked up from his chair, his face gray. Emily, we cannot just show up. We uninvited her. We told her we wanted privacy. Privacy is for poor people. Desmond, Emily shouted, pulling her boots on. That is not a private party. That is a networking event. And we are her family. We have a right to be there. She owes us an explanation. She owes Dante an explanation. Dante stood up, the decision made. He grabbed his car keys, his eyes hard and focused. Emily is right. If she has the mayor there, she is making moves. She needs family around her to keep her grounded. And I need to talk to her. If she has this kind of capital, she needs a financial advisor. She needs family managing that money, not strangers. He looked at his parents. Get your coats. We are not spending Christmas in this depression box. We are going to where we belong. Viola stood up slowly, the allure of the mansion and the proximity to power overriding her shame. She smoothed her dress, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. She adjusted her wig, her face settling into a look of determined maternal concern. "I should bring the sweet potato pie," she said, her voice gaining strength. "She always loved my pie. It will be a peace offering. She cannot turn away her mother on Christmas." They moved with a frantic energy fueled by greed and the desperate need to be close to the light they saw on the screen. They abandoned the half-eaten meal and the cheap wine, leaving the house dark and silent. They piled into Dante's leased SUV, the engine roaring to life as he peeled out of the driveway. They sped toward the highway, driving fast and reckless, chasing the phantom of a life they felt they were owed. They convinced themselves they were going to a family reunion. They had no idea they were driving straight into a buzzsaw. The drive from the modest suburb to the heights of Buckhead took only 20 minutes, but it felt like crossing a border between two warring nations. Dante drove with a manic intensity, his hands gripping the steering wheel of his leased BMW X5 so tightly that the leather creaked. He navigated the winding tree-lined streets of West Paces Ferry, where the estates were set so far back from the road that you could only see the glow of their security lights. The silence here was heavy-weighted with old money and privacy. As they approached the GPS coordinates, the darkness was suddenly cut by a line of red taillights. A queue of vehicles stretched down the private drive, waiting for the valet service. Dante pulled up to the end of the line, and the contrast was immediate and violent. Directly in front of him idled a matte black Rolls-Royce Phantom, its engine a silent hum of engineering perfection. Behind him, a sleek silver McLaren pulled up, its low profile aggressive and predatory. Sandwiched between these titans of automotive luxury, Dante's SUV looked like a toy. It was a 3-year-old model with a scratch on the rear bumper that he had covered with touch-up paint, and the brake pads squealed softly every time he inched forward. In his own neighborhood, this car was a status symbol. Here it was an embarrassment. Emily stared out the window, her eyes wide and predatory, reflecting the red glare of the taillights. "Look at that," she whispered, pointing a manicured finger at the Bentley Continental GT pulling away from the valet stand. "That is the limited edition. The waiting list for that car is 2 years." She turned to Dante, her voice trembling with a mix of awe and fury. "You told me Jasmine was a nobody. You told me she lived in a shoebox. How does a nobody get these people to come to her house on Christmas Eve?" Dante did not answer. He was too busy trying to keep his foot steady on the brake. He felt small. For the first time in his life, the illusion of his own grandeur was being stripped away, not by words but by the undeniable reality of heavy metal and horsepower. He had spent years looking down on his sister, convincing himself that his finance job and his leased lifestyle made him the superior sibling. But as he sat there surrounded by millions of dollars worth of steel, he realized he was just a tourist in the world she actually owned. Viola sat in the back seat, clutching her Tupperware container of sweet potato pie against her chest like a shield. She stared at the massive iron gates looming ahead, 12 feet tall and solid black, blocking the view of the house. "I am her mother," she muttered to herself, a mantra of entitlement. She cannot close the gate on her mother. It is Christmas. She loves my pie. Desmond looked out the window at the stone pillars flanking the entrance. He saw the security cameras swiveling silently, tracking every movement. He saw the men in dark suits standing with their hands clasped behind their backs, earpieces coiled against their necks. This was not a family home. This was a fortress. And for the first time he felt a flicker of fear. They were not driving into a reunion. They were driving into a territory where their rules no longer applied. The line moved forward. The Rolls-Royce was waved through the gates, swinging open smoothly to admit it. Then it was Dante's turn. He rolled down his window, putting on his best corporate smile, the one he used to charm investors before he lost their money. He prepared to drop his name to claim his place as the brother of the hostess. But as the valet stepped forward, glancing at the scratched bumper and the frantic occupants inside, the smile faltered. The air in the car grew hot and stifling. They were at the threshold of the kingdom, but they had forgotten that queens do not open the drawbridge for the people who tried to burn the castle down. The valet, a young man in a sharp uniform, leaned down to the window, his expression polite but firm. "Good evening, sir. May I have your invitation code, please?" He held out a handheld scanner, the screen glowing soft blue in the darkness. Dante's smile wavered, but he kept it plastered on. "Oh, we do not need a code," he said, his voice booming with false joviality. "I am Dante Wilson, the hostess. Jasmine Wilson is my sister. These are our parents. We are the family." The valet did not move. He did not smile back. He simply looked at the tablet in his hand, tapped a few times, and then looked back at Dante. "I understand, sir, but this is a private event. All guests must have a confirmed QR code for entry. Do you have one on your phone?" Emily leaned across Dante, her perfume heavy and cloying in the small space. "Excuse me?" She snapped, her patience already fraying. "Did you not hear him? We are the family. We do not need tickets to see our own sister. Just open the gate. It is freezing out here and we are late." The valet straightened up and signaled to a man standing in the shadows near the gatehouse. This man was different. He was not a valet. He was 6'4", built like a linebacker, and wore a suit that strained at the shoulders. He wore a coiled earpiece and moved with the heavy, deliberate grace of someone who had handled situations far more dangerous than an angry suburban family. He walked over to the car, his presence alone blocking out the light from the house. "Is there a problem here?" the security chief asked, his voice a deep rumble that vibrated through the chassis of the SUV. "Yes, there is a problem," Viola shrieked from the back seat, rolling down her window. "The problem is that you people are keeping a mother from her daughter on Christmas. I am Viola Wilson. I birthed the woman who owns this house. Now open this gate before I call the police and tell them you are holding my child hostage." The security chief looked at Viola with eyes that were completely unimpressed. He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his inside jacket pocket. He unfolded it slowly, deliberately. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, reading from the list. "Mr. Desmond Wilson, Dante Wilson, Emily Wilson." "See," Viola said triumphantly, settling back against the seat. "We are on the list. Now let us in." "You are on a list, Mom," the chief corrected, his tone flat. "But it is not the guest list. It is the do not admit list. Your names have been flagged for immediate denial of entry. You are trespassing on private property. I am going to have to ask you to turn this vehicle around and vacate the premises immediately." The silence inside the car was absolute. It was the silence of a world shattering, denied, blacklisted, by their own daughter. Dante stared at the security chief, his mouth hanging open. "That is a mistake," he stammered. "Jasmine would never. She loves us. We are her family." "Ms. Wilson was very specific, sir," the chief said, stepping closer to the car, effectively blocking any attempt to drive forward. "She gave us your names, your photos, and your license plate number. She instructed us that under no circumstances were you to be allowed past this gate. Now please reverse the vehicle. You are holding up the line." Behind them, the horn of a Porsche blared, impatient and sharp. Viola let out a strangled sob, clutching her pie. "She did this," she whispered. "She actually did this. She locked us out." Emily turned on Dante, her face twisted in fury. "Do something," she hissed. "Do not just sit there. Let a bouncer talk to your mother like that. Call her. Call Jasmine right now and tell her to fix this." Dante fumbled for his phone, his fingers numb. He dialed Jasmine's number. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. He dialed again. Voicemail. She had blocked him. The reality of his exclusion was settling in, cold and heavy like the stone pillars of the gate. He was not the golden child here. He was not the VIP. He was a security threat, and the gate was not opening. The commotion at the gate had grown loud enough to penetrate the heavy soundproofing of the estate walls. Inside, the party was still in full swing, the jazz band playing a low, sultry number while guests mingled under the crystal lights. But outside, the air was thick with the screeching entitlement of people who had never been told no in their lives. I could see it all on the security monitor in the hallway. My mother waving her hands, Dante puffing out his chest like a bantam rooster trying to fight a hawk. It was pathetic. It was time. I set my empty champagne flute on a passing tray and picked up a glass of the heavy vintage Cabernet Malik had poured earlier. I needed something dark. I smoothed the velvet of my gown, checking my reflection in the hall mirror one last time. I did not see a victim. I saw the executioner. "I am coming with you," Malik said, stepping up beside me. His presence was not a question, it was a statement of fact. "Good," I said. "I want them to see what a real man looks like." We walked to the front doors. The heavy walnut panels swung open silently, revealing the crisp December night. The cold air hit me, but the heat of my anger kept me warm. I stepped out onto the landing at the top of the sweeping stone staircase that led down to the circular drive. The security light sensed my movement and brightened, casting a spotlight directly on me. I stood there, bathed in a halo of artificial daylight, looking down at the scene below like a goddess descending from Olympus to judge the mortals. The effect was instantaneous. Viola stopped screaming mid-sentence. Dante froze, his hand half raised in a gesture of impotent rage. Emily stared up at me, her mouth hanging open in a way that was distinctly unladylike. For a moment there was only the sound of the wind in the pines and the distant hum of the city. They looked at me and I knew what they saw. They saw the red dress that cost more than their car. They saw the diamond on my finger that caught the light like a star. They saw the house rising up behind me, a monolith of glass and stone that whispered of wealth they could not comprehend. But more importantly, they saw my face. I looked down at them, and I did not feel the familiar pang of longing. I did not feel the urge to fix it, to smooth things over, to make them comfortable. I looked at them the way one looks at strangers on a subway train. I saw a woman in a tight dress holding a pie. I saw a man in a cheap suit sweating through his collar. I saw a couple who had built their lives on the backs of their children and were now confused why the ride had stopped. They were not my family. They were just people who used to know me. Jasmine Viola cried out, her voice cracking with relief and a sickening amount of hope. "Oh, thank God. Tell this man who we are. Tell him to open the gate. We brought the pie, baby. We brought the pie." She held up the plastic container like it was a golden ticket. Like a Tupperware of sweet potatoes could erase 30 years of neglect. Like it could buy entry into a kingdom she had tried to lock me out of. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, letting the rich liquid coat my tongue. I did not smile. I did not wave. I just watched them, waiting for the silence to stretch until it became uncomfortable, until it became painful, until they realized that the daughter they were calling for had died the moment they hung up the phone 3 days ago. "Oh, stop with the theatrics, Jasmine!" Viola called out, her voice pitching up into that fake church lady register she used when the pastor walked by. She laughed, a tinkling artificial sound. "Things. The auctioneers are coming in the morning to liquidate the furniture." I turned and walked to the door where Xavier was waiting. I did not look back. I had just bought my freedom for $1, and it was the best money I had ever spent. The pen felt heavier than a brick in Reginald's hand. It was his favorite Mont Blanc, the one with the gold inlay he had bought in Switzerland 20 years ago. It was a symbol of his authority, a tool he had used to sign checks that could buy small islands. Now it felt cold and slippery against his sweating skin. He looked down at the signature line on the document. It was just a thin black line, but it looked like the edge of a cliff. He tried to steady his breathing, but his lungs felt like they were filled with crushed glass. He pressed the nib to the paper. His hand was trembling so violently that the first stroke was just a jagged scratch. He stopped and closed his eyes. He could feel Brianna watching him. She was not gloating, she was not smiling. She was just waiting, with that terrifying patience of a predator that knows the prey has nowhere to run. He forced his hand to move. Reginald. The letters were shaky and uneven, like the handwriting of a child or a very old man. And that was when it hit him. He was an old man. He was 62 years old, For decades, he had hidden his age behind expensive suits and hair dye and the vitality that comes with absolute power. But stripped of his money, stripped of his title, he was just an elderly man with high blood pressure and bad knees. He finished the signature and the pen clattered onto the glass table. It sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. He pushed the paper toward his daughter. He did not have the strength to lift his head high. He looked up at her from under his eyebrows, and for the first time in his life, there was no arrogance in his gaze. There was no fire. There was only a hollow, terrified emptiness. He looked at Brianna and he realized he did not know her. He had spent her entire life telling her who she was. He had told her she was weak. He had told her she was useless. He had told her she was a burden. He had been so busy shouting his own narrative that he had never bothered to look at the woman growing up in his shadow. And now that woman was standing over him holding the deed to his existence. Brianna picked up the paper and checked the signature. She nodded once, a sharp, efficient movement. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was not cruel, but it was distant. It was the voice of a stranger. Reginald wanted to say something. He wanted to scream. He wanted to beg. He wanted to ask how it had come to this. How had he gone from the king of Atlanta to a pauper in a single week? But his throat was dry and his tongue felt swollen. He realized with a jolt of pure panic that he had no safety net. He had no secret offshore account. He had no friends who would take his call. He was truly and completely alone. He looked at his hands. They looked withered and useless. These were not the hands of a CEO anymore. They were the hands of a man who would have to learn how to operate a coin laundry machine. They were the hands of a man who would have to take the bus. The fear washed over him cold and suffocating. He wasn't just broke. He was broken. And as he watched Brianna place the contract into her leather portfolio, he knew that he would never be whole again. The king was dead, and he had signed his own death warrant for $1. The morning light poured into the private suite at the hospital, turning the room into a glowing haven of soft whites and creams. It was quiet here, the kind of expensive silence that money buys to keep the world at bay. Everywhere you looked, there were flowers. Massive arrangements of white orchids from the Tokyo partners stood like sentinels by the door, while baskets of imported roses from the European board covered the window ledges. The room smelled like a garden in full bloom, masking the sterile scent of the hospital. In the center of the oversized bed, propped up against fluffy pillows, Brianna held a small bundle wrapped in cashmere. Her son was sleeping soundly, his tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that captivated the entire room. He had a tuft of dark hair and his father's strong chin. Xavier sat on the edge of the mattress, his jacket discarded on a chair, his sleeves rolled up. He looked at his wife and child with an expression of awe that softened the sharp angles of his face. He reached out and let the baby's tiny hand curl around his finger. It was a perfect moment, a tableau of absolute victory and peace. The nurse knocked softly before entering with yet another gift basket, this one filled with silver rattles and silk onesies from the mayor. Brianna smiled, tired but genuinely happy. She had everything she had ever fought for right here in her arms. Miles away on the outskirts of Stone Mountain, the atmosphere was heavy with a very different kind of tension. The air in the cramped two-bedroom apartment smelled of stale frying oil and mildew. The walls were thin, and the sound of the neighbors arguing about a football game vibrated through the floorboards. In the small galley kitchen, Reginald sat at a scratched laminate table staring at a crumpled piece of paper. It was the electric bill, and the numbers were printed in angry red ink. Camille stood at the sink, scrubbing a pot with a sponge that had seen better days. She wore a faded robe that had once been silk, but was now frayed at the hems, a ghost of her former wardrobe. She turned off the faucet, which dripped incessantly, and spun around her face, etched with deep lines of bitterness. "Why is it so dark in here, Reginald?" She snapped, her voice shrill in the small space. "I told you to change the bulb in the hallway 3 days ago. Or did you forget to pay the electric bill again?" Reginald slammed his hand down on the table, making the cheap plastic salt shaker jump. With what money, Camille? The pension check does not clear until Tuesday. You spent the last $50 on that ridiculous face cream you did not need. It felt cool and heavy in my hand like a stone ready to be cast. Viola was still talking, still spinning a web of lies about how they just wanted to be together as a family, but I was done listening. I tapped the screen twice, unlocking the device and opening the smart home interface. I selected the external audio feed, the one that controlled the hidden environmental speakers lining the driveway and the gate entrance. You say you came here because you were worried, I said, my voice calm but amplified slightly by the acoustics of the stone entryway. You say you wanted to save me from a lonely Christmas. That is a beautiful story, Mother. But I think we should listen to the prologue. I pressed play. The sound that erupted from the hidden speakers was crystal clear. It was not grainy or distorted. It was high-definition audio broadcast, at a volume usually reserved for emergency announcements. Jasmine, baby, are you busy? My mother's voice boomed through the night air, echoing off the slate roof and the iron gates. It was the recording from Tuesday. Every inflection, every drop of condescension was magnified. The real Viola standing at the gate froze. Her mouth snapped shut. Dante looked around wildly, as if the voice were coming from the trees themselves. Then the recording continued mercilessly. We are just saying maybe you should make other plans. You are a single woman, surely you have friends or work to do. Dante needs this time with his father. We do not want you distracting him with your noise. Your noise. The words hung in the cold air, vibrating with cruelty. I let the silence follow them. I let the valets hear it. I let the security team hear it. I let the wind carry it back to the people who had spoken it. I tapped the screen again, cutting the feed. Did you hear that, Mama? I asked, leaning forward against the stone balustrade. That was you. That was 3 days ago. You called me noise. You called me a distraction. You told me that I did not belong in the core family unit. You made it very clear that your definition of a perfect Christmas required my absence. Viola stammered, her face turning an ugly shade of blotchy red under the security lights. That was taken out of context. I did not mean it like that. We were just stressed. You meant every word, I corrected her. And you know what? I respected you. I did exactly what you asked. You wanted an intimate Christmas. You wanted privacy. You wanted a holiday without my influence. So I gave it to you. I stayed away. I built my own table. And now that you see what is on my table, you want to pull up a chair. I looked at Emily, who was shrinking behind Dante, trying to make herself invisible. And you, Emily. You wanted sophistication. You wanted class. Well, this is what class looks like. It looks like respecting boundaries. It looks like taking no for an answer. I am honoring your request for separation. I am giving you the gift of my absence. But we are here now. Dante shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. We are at the gate. Just let us in, Jasmine. Stop playing games. I am not playing a game, Dante, I said, my voice dropping to a register of absolute finality. I am enforcing a policy. You set the rules for your house. I am setting the rules for mine, and rule number 1 is that I do not allow people who view me as a burden to benefit from my blessings. You wanted a silent night. Go home and enjoy it. I signaled to the security chief. He stepped forward, his arms crossed a wall of muscle and authority. But I was not done. Not yet. Because words were one thing, but paper trails were another, and I had a stack of paper that was about to bury them. Dante was shouting now, his voice raw with a mix of panic and entitlement that echoed off the stone walls of my estate. He was screaming about loyalty, about blood, about how I owed him this, because I was the sister who made it while he was just having a run of bad luck. Bad luck. That was what he called 5 years of systematic embezzlement and a gambling addiction that had eaten a hole through his soul. He thought I did not know. He thought because I was busy fixing other people's lives, I was not paying attention to the train wreck of his own. He was wrong. I reached behind the stone pillar where Malik had discreetly placed a thick manila envelope. It was heavy. It was dense with the weight of receipts, court filings, and foreclosure notices. I held it up so the security lights caught the stark official seal on the front. You want to talk about family, Dante? I asked, my voice cutting through his tirade like a scalpel. You want to talk about why you really need to get inside this house tonight? It is not because you miss me. It is not because you want to wish me a Merry Christmas. It is because you are drowning, and you think I am your life raft. I stepped closer to the edge of the balcony. You told Mom and Dad you were managing a hedge fund. You told them you were tripling their retirement. You told them you were a financial genius. But geniuses do not have 3 active lawsuits against them for wire fraud, do they, Dante? Dante stopped screaming. His mouth snapped shut. His eyes went wide, fixing on the envelope in my hand. And you, Emily, I continued, turning my gaze to my sister-in-law who was trying to hide behind her husband. You talk a lot about class. You talk a lot about pedigree. But looking at this background check I ran this morning, it seems your last address was not a luxury condo. It was a correctional facility in Florida for check kiting. Is that the sophistication you brought to the Wilson family? Viola gasped, clutching Desmond's arm. Jasmine, what are you saying? Stop telling lies. I am not the one lying, Mama, I said. I am the only one here telling the truth. And since you love reading so much, since you love inspecting every detail of my life, I figured I would share the reading material. I untied the string on the envelope. I did not hand it to the security guard to pass down. I did not walk down the stairs to deliver it. I held it over the railing and I tipped it upside down. Hundreds of pages of documents spilled out. Bank statements printed in red ink, mugshots, eviction notices, IRS audit warnings. The night wind caught them, swirling them into a chaotic snowstorm of evidence. They fluttered down, drifting over the heads of my parents, slapping against the windshield of Dante's leased SUV, landing in the perfectly manicured gravel. One sheet landed right at Desmond's feet. He bent down slowly, his joints creaking in the cold, and picked it up. It was a notice of default on a loan Dante had taken out in Desmond's name 3 months ago. A loan Desmond knew nothing about. I watched my father read it. I watched his face turn from confusion to horror to a gray, devastating realization. He looked at Dante. He looked at the son he had worshipped, the son he had placed on a pedestal while he treated me like a footstool. Dante Desmond whispered, his voice trembling. What is this? It says I owe $50,000. It says the house is collateral. Dante tried to snatch the paper away, but the wind blew more pages against his legs. Emily was frantically trying to gather the papers that detailed her own criminal history, stuffing them into her coat pockets. But there were too many. The truth was literally covering them, burying them in the debris of their own deception. I leaned over the railing, my face calm and impassive. Merry Christmas, family, I said. I hope you enjoy the reading. It is a lot more interesting than Austrian chamber music. Now get off my property before I call the people who wrote those letters, because unlike you, the FBI does not take holidays off. The silence that followed the paper storm was short-lived, because in the distance a sound began to rise that cut through the cold December air like a knife. It started as a low wail, then grew into a cacophony of sirens that vibrated against the iron gates. Blue and red lights washed over the driveway, painting my parents' terrified faces in strobes of emergency colors. Dante looked up from the damning documents, his eyes wide with a primal panic. He thought perhaps the neighbors had called about the noise or the parking situation. He was wrong. Neighbors call the local precinct. I called the Federal Bureau of Investigation. 3 black SUVs screeched to a halt behind Dante's leased BMW, blocking him in completely. Men in windbreakers with yellow lettering stepped out, their movements precise and lethal. They did not look like they were there to issue a citation. They looked like they were there to take down a target. Dante Wilson, one of the agents, shouted, his hand resting near his holster. Put your hands where we can see them. Dante froze, the wind whipping the foreclosure notices around his ankles. Wait, there is a mistake, he stammered, his voice cracking. I am just visiting my sister. This is a family matter. It is a federal matter, Mr. Wilson, the agent replied, stepping forward and spinning Dante around. You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and interstate transportation of stolen property. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was louder than the sirens. It was the sound of a 35-year delusion finally snapping shut. Viola screamed a sound of pure maternal agony as she watched her golden boy being shoved against the hood of the car he did not actually own. She tried to lunge forward, but Desmond held her back, his face a mask of gray ash. He was watching his legacy be dismantled in real time. I watched from the balcony, my wineglass still in my hand. I did not feel pity. I felt the cold satisfaction of a job finished. Dante thought he could steal from our parents and use me as the scapegoat. He thought he could gamble away their future and hide behind my silence. But he forgot what I do for a living. I manage crises for other people, but when it comes to my own life, I eliminate the threat. I had sent the dossier to the authorities 3 weeks ago. I had timed it perfectly. I wanted him to feel safe. I wanted him to feel entitled. I wanted him to come to my gate demanding entry so that when the hammer dropped, he would know exactly who was holding the handle. This was not just an arrest, it was an exorcism. And as they engaged the locks on the police vehicle, I knew the ghost of Dante's potential was finally gone. Viola collapsed onto the cold pavement, her knees hitting the gravel with a sickening thud that echoed louder than the dying sirens.